They broke me totally up. They took everything I had, and all my wife had. I had to come away with nothing. James Hicks, a formerly enslaved man of Mississippi, gave this statement to members of Congress in 1871. Hicks was one of several million African Americans living throughout the former slaveholding states who were working to establish authority and autonomy over their lives, which they believed was essential to their fate as a liberated people. Hicks accomplished a number of the goals that African Americans had for life after slavery. He established an independent home and secured a sharecropping contract to work and provide for his family. Everything appeared to be going well until 1870, when a white planter named Bill Darden tried to evict Hicks from his land without allowing him to gather his portion of the crop he and his family had produced. Hicks refused to leave without his share of the crop, which prompted Darden to shoot at him to try to drive him away. Hicks fled, believing that his absence might give Darden time to calm down and be reasonable. However, in Hicks's absence, a gang of white men descended on his home, terrorized his family, destroyed his property, and threatened to kill James if he ever returned. Once he learned about the assault on his family, James Hicks snuck back to collect his wife and children and the belongings that they could carry. After the family relocated, they attempted to start anew. Yet starting over without the money that Hicks might have gained had he been able to sell the crop he produced was difficult. With the loss of the Hicks family's home, their belongings, their share of the crop, and James's physical injuries, there was little chance they would recover from the losses that they sustained. James Hicks's experience was quite common for Black Southerners. What makes Hicks's experience stand out, however, is that he resisted the violence he endured by putting his account of what happened into the public record. In They Left Great Marks on Me, I use these testimonies to illuminate African Americans' experience of racial violence and to explain how their efforts to share their experiences helped them to mobilize and launch one of the earliest campaigns in what became the civil rights movement. Historians who initially examined African Americans' testimonies often did so to prove that racial violence occurred or to argue that Black people resisted it. Accepting the occurrence of white violence and Black resistance as a given freed me to explore African Americans' different strategies for resisting violence. Some Black people engaged in self-defense, but many people, seeing the futility of physical or armed resistance against the Klan or against the mob, used more subtle strategies like testifying. It is easy to dismiss the act of speaking about racial violence, or to argue that it did not constitute meaningful resistance. However, I believe that to do so is a mistake. Black Southerners who risked their lives and detailed the horror of enduring and witnessing this violence were not merely giving statements, they were resisting violence discursively. Treating Black people's testimonies about racial violence as acts of resistance helps us to understand what African Americans felt about violence and what they wanted federal officials and the American people to know and hear about their suffering. For example, when Mary Brown testified before Congress, she explained that a gang of white men invaded her family's Georgia home and dragged them out into the yard where they stripped and whipped them because they thought she might inform authorities about their killing of another white man. In explaining They Left Great Marks on Me, Brown was describing the physical injuries she sustained during the attack. However, when read alongside the testimonies of other victims, the larger implications of Brown's proclamations about what happened to her and her family become clear. The similarities in African Americans' testimonies suggest that they, like Mary Brown, wanted federal officials and white Americans to understand that they were marked physically, economically, socially, and psychologically by their experiences of racial violence. They hoped that people who heard their stories would identify with their suffering and support their efforts to get justice and end violence. In essence, they were saying, we are American citizens. These other Americans violated our rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, and we demand justice.